Okay, so far in this series, we've demonstrated how to create a prefab and then how to instantiate that prefab over a range of positions and then travel from one side of the screen to the other. Now, if you're using this for spawning an enemy wave, then you probably are going to want more than just one type of enemy. And so that's what we're going to do in this one. We're going to demonstrate how to add in a second type of enemy and then randomize which one is being spawned. So, for the most part, you're just going to see really a rinsing and repeating of what we just did, as far as we're just going to use another random number generator to randomize which enemy is spawned, and then just another instantiate statement to instantiate that enemy. So, what we're going to do, first we need to create our prefab. So we're going to go up to Game Object, 2D Object, Sprite. As you can see, I brought in this new image. So we'll just come up here, put it onto Sprite, change this to Bug. So we've got the transform, we got the sprite. We are going to want a 2D rigid body. And then we will attach the script. I suppose we can do that now, even though it's called bcon. You could recycle the same script. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that. And so now these two prefabs, well, this isn't a prefab yet since we haven't moved it, but they should be comparable. So let's go ahead and drag bug here, delete it from the scene, and now we're just going to do a quick comparison. So it's got transform, got sprite renderer, got rigid body 2D, transform, sprite renderer, rigid body 2D, and the script, Good. So they look comparable. Now we do have to change gravity scale. So that's an easy thing to overlook, because at first we're just looking to see if they've got the right components. Now you also have to make sure the settings within those components are the same. So now we have a new object. We have a new prefab. Problem is the GM isn't aware of it. So just like I said a few minutes ago, this is going to be rinse and repeat. Just as we made the GM aware of this, we're going to make the GM aware of that in the same manner. So let's go to our game flow script, and you can either put it right after this one or at the bottom. If you're working on a larger project, you might want to put if you add new variables, you might want to add them at the bottom. That way, if something breaks, you know in which order you added it. Or if you want, you could just put similar ones together, whatever kind of workflow works best for you. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put them together. So this is bug enemy. We're going to save. And then we're going to associate it like we did the last one. So we click on GM. There we go, bug enemy. So we take our new bug and we put it there. Now what we're going to do is we now need to give instructions to the GM object to be able to select this one. So how do we do that? Well, just as we added another transform, we have to add another int. So public int which enemy, and we'll set it to 0 to begin with, although it doesn't really matter. So just as we use this one to store a random number, we're going to use this to store a random number. In this case, it's going to be which enemy. So in the update section, right after the other random range, you can do which enemy equals random dot range. Like I said, rinse and repeat. Now, again, it claims that the upper number is inclusive, but as you saw in that first video, when we looked at the actual numbers, it never showed up. So we only have 2 enemies right now, but since the top number will never show up, we'll go out to 3. Don't worry, there's a very easy fail-safe in case 3 shows up. Okay, so now what we need to do is we now need to actually do something with this. We now have a number that says that there is going to be a different enemy, but it's not applied, so it means nothing to the computer yet. It means nothing to Unity yet. It only means something to you, the designer. So what we're going to do is, in our spawn delay coroutine, rather than just saying once the time passes 1 second, Rather than spawning this, we're going to have an if statement that looks at this and then spawns accordingly. So, if, parenthesis, which enemy equals equals, remember two equal signs, 1, then we want something to happen. Now, if you only have one line, you don't need to put squiggly parentheses around this, squiggly brackets. But if you've got more than one line, you have to surround it with brackets. So just as a best practice, we're going to surround it with brackets. Can't tell you how many times I've put a second line in here and then suddenly things stop working. You need those brackets. So if, else. Now, rather than typing it all out, we're going to copy and paste this. It does two things. A, allows us to be lazy and not type it out again. But 2, it again reminds us that we're not adding really new functionality. It's just rinse and repeat. And we're just going to change it in a second. Let me just put the brackets in. So rather than the bee enemy, we want it to be the bug enemy. And just like that, what you've done now is now you've said, if this number is 1, spawn the bee enemy. If it's anything else, spawn the bug enemy. And that is how you do a failsafe in this condition. Because if we said, if which enemy is 1, spawn the bee. If which enemy equals 2, spawn the bug. But what happens if suddenly that number 3 comes up, even though it doesn't ever seem to come up? Well, by doing just this else, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, doesn't matter. Now, true, the range should stop it, but by doing this kind of all-encapsulating else, if it comes up to anything else, then you get this enemy. And that should basically do it. Save that. And always remember to save, because if you make a change and you don't save and you run it and it's not working, it might be just because you didn't save it. Because until you save it, it's still using the old version of the script. It hasn't recompiled it. So let's run it. That B, that B, that B, that B. There we go. And just like that, you now have 2 different enemies. There's other things you can do too, because one of the problems with random numbers is that even though it's random, you could have the same number come up repeatedly consecutively. I noticed that when one of the runs, I think in the second video, that 3 bees in a row spawned on the same line. So what you can do is you can keep track of what your most recent random number was, and then if it comes up a second time consecutively, then you ignore it and have another random number being generated. So you don't have to take this as an absolute, that you can then, like I said, add a few if statements, and that if the same number keeps coming up over and over again, then have it run another random number, so that way you can basically force randomization onto it. So I think that should about do it. Now, these are moving at a constant speed. So what we could do is we could tweak that a little bit. Now, using gravity is easier because it's a built-in calculation, but we're not using gravity. So what we can do is we can go to our B script, our bcon script, and what we can do is after a certain amount of time has occurred, we can add additional velocity. So this says when the object is instantiated, because it's the start section, to do this amount of velocity. What you could do is after a certain amount of time, you can have the velocity increase. And there's really complex ways you could do that. I'll show you a very simple way to do it. And yes, as I've already said, there are better ways and there are other ways. I'm just showing you a way to get started. So what we're going to do is outside of start, outside of update, and let's get rid of this remark. We're going to do IEnumerator. So IEnumerator, and we're going to call this speed up. Okay. And I still have to get used to using Microsoft Visual Studio. I was using MonoDevelop so long, and I have to admit that there's a lot of things that Microsoft Visual Studio does that MonoDevelop doesn't. Like if you notice, a lot of times, well, you probably can't tell, but a lot of times when I hit one parenthesis, the other parenthesis automatically appears. Same thing like when I hit the first bracket, the second bracket automatically appears. So some nice features to Microsoft Visual Studio if you use this instead of MonoDevelop. I'm not sure if Unity 2018 even comes with MonoDevelop anymore. Anyways, so like we showed before, so yield, return, new, and again, don't worry too much about what that means, that this is really what you care about. Wait 4 seconds, and let's do like just 1 second. And then we want something to happen. What do we want to happen? We're going to take this, speed it up. And so we'll make it, say, 3, -3. Then you can actually do multiple delays here, and it'll wait another second. And again, someone's going to say, why didn't you just use a variable, combine this? It's meant to be introductory. And this would say before. So when the object is instantiated, it has an x velocity of -2. After it has existed for 1 second, the velocity is increased to 3. So it's not an addition, it's a total of 3. Because certain commands in Unity add to the pre-existing amount. This doesn't. This is an override. It's saying it's no longer -2, it's now -3. Wait 1 more second, and now it's -4. And so that way you're going to have that speed up kind of like you did with when we originally were using the reverse gravity. Again, it won't be as slick as that because that is calculated with a much more complex algorithm, whereas this is just increasing it in a linear manner. So now, let's run that. There's the first speed. Oh, you know I did wrong? I am so sorry. I made a really silly mistake because I'm like, okay, they're not spreading out, so we know the speed isn't working. I created this coroutine, but I didn't actually call it. So sorry, I apologize for the confusion. I'll usually edit out when I make mistakes, but this is a very common mistake. So you got to remember, so start will run on its own. Void update will run on its own. On trigger enter will run on its own. There's lots of parts of the script that run on its own. This is a coroutine that you specifically have to call. So I'm going to just go ahead and leave this error in because I think it's a great teachable moment. So we want speed up. Better. Now you can see they're pulling apart. And you can just keep adding more and more speed. So that could be a difficulty setting, is that on the easier difficulties, it becomes 3 and then 4. Maybe on the difficulty, higher difficult setting, it starts at 5 and then goes to 7. Whatever. That's up to you to decide if you want to put in that kind of level of difficulty. But just want to let you know that that is also an option. So I think that's about it. You've now seen how to randomly decide which enemy is going to show up, and now we've added in the acceleration. So again, it's certainly not as clean as using gravity, but it would certainly do the job. And I think that should about do it for this video. If there's anything you want to see, please just do a like and a comment, and I'll keep adding more videos to this series depending on what you guys would like to see. So I hope this was helpful.